Kailer Yamamoto's ready to play against the Rangers, but Puljujarvi didn't hit waivers. Is something going on in oil country? We will talk about that and much more in today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and former Oilers Game Day producer, Brett Holden. As mentioned on today's episode, Kailer Yamamoto. He is ready to go against the New York Rangers, but no waivers for Puljujarvi as expected. What is happening in oil country, and could there be a move on the horizon, or is there another way for the Edmonton Oilers to have both Puljujarvi and Yamamoto in the lineup tomorrow? Maybe. We'll talk about that in just a second. But also on today's episode, that horrendous penalty kill for the Oilers against the Detroit Red Wings probably cost the Oilers that game. But why? And does it have to do with the absence of Vinny Desharnais? We will talk about that a little later on. And to wrap up today's episode, the good, the bad, and the ugly from that game against the Detroit Red Wings that the Edmonton Oilers unfortunately lost 5-4 in a shootout. All that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. Alrighty, let's talk a little Kailer Yamamoto. As Yamamoto has been practicing with the Edmonton Oilers for a little bit now. I believe he was also on that trip with the Oilers into all around that Eastern kind of trip, I guess. And he is ready to go against the New York Rangers now. He has been announced that he will be in the lineup. However, the Edmonton Oilers didn't place anybody on waivers as expected they would. More specifically, as they expected with Puljujarvi. Now, Twitter was set ablaze on Thursday. Today is Thursday, yes. The Twitter was set ablaze on Thursday with all of this going on. The chatter around what the Oilers could do, and then it was also exemplified by the fact that the San Jose Sharks called up a defenseman. So, hey, you know, silly season's gonna cause some things. Hey, I was caught up in it as well. But how can this work for the Edmonton Oilers with Kailer Yamamoto being in the lineup, and the Oilers not really being salary cap complacent for the game? Here are the two things that can happen. Either there is a trade. The Edmonton Oilers are going to make a deal, become cap compliant, move Puljujarvi, but it sounds like there is no deal imminent at the moment. Of course, things can change, and that has been the thing all day. So we will talk about that in a second, though. The other thing that is more likely to happen, however, is that the Oilers will end up circumventing the cap by putting paper transactions basically on Dylan Holloway and Vinny Desharnais being sent down to Bakersfield, and then there could be a potential injury where the Oilers have to make an emergency call up and somebody comes up, and that's the move. Here's my deal. Why? Why would you do all of that just to bring in Kailer Yamamoto? The other thing too is if the Oilers do put Holloway and Desharnais in these paper transactions down to Bakersfield, the Edmonton Oilers could run a 20-man roster against the New York Rangers. Again, why? Dylan Holloway, Philip Broberg, and Philip Broberg is also in this conversation, but he has played well enough that it seems like he won't be. But Broberg is still in the conversation. And Desharnais have been some of the better Oilers and more productive depth players for the Edmonton Oilers over these last 12, 13 games. You see what happens, and we'll talk about just the impact Vinny Desharnais has on the shorthanded unit. Why would you take him out just to bring in Kailer Yamamoto for a couple of games or a game against the Rangers before you make a move? It doesn't make sense. The other thing that's kind of weirding me out about this entire situation is what I said just there with Jesse Puljujarvi. A trade is not imminent, but things can change. The general consensus around Edmonton media, Daniel Nugent-Bowman, Ryan Rishaug, Bob Stauffer, you can go, Jason Gregor, you can go on with all these insiders around the Oilers, and no one really seems to know what's going on. Normally, there's someone who throws cold water on whatever is happening or whatever the hot topic on Twitter seems to be. But there's no one on Twitter right now, or at least publicly, that is throwing hot or cold water on this hot situation. That kind of starts to make me believe that no one really knows what's going on. But if you did take a look at the press conference with Jay Woodcroft, when asked about some of the potential moves the Edmonton Oilers may need to make, including who will be and who won't be in the lineup, Jay Woodcroft had a little bit of a we'll see type smirk. In fact, he said we'll see, couldn't get out the next word that he said, smiled, smirked, looked around, and let the next question be asked. This, I don't know. I haven't seen Jay Woodcroft I'm not saying he lost his composure by any means, but kind of took that mask off for a second, you know? He is a very, very, very good media person. Yeah, I mean, he's a child actor. He's got to be. But he's very good with the words that he uses and the way that he speaks to media that blurs the line between what's really going on behind the scenes and what the public needs to know. And that was kind of one of those unmasking moments where he went, is something going on? So we shall wait and see. We still have over 24 hours until puck drop between the Edmonton Oilers and the New York Rangers. 7 o'clock puck drop between those two teams at Rogers Place. That one's going to be a fun one. The Edmonton Oilers are going to need to bounce back, and especially that penalty kill. We will talk about the penalty kill and the importance of Vinny Desharnais on that penalty kill in just a second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained. And speaking of draining threes, my team, the Los Angeles Clippers, are having a big game tonight. They are against their actual rivals. Not their actual rivals. I don't know why I put that like they're fake rivals. They're real rivals between the Clippers and the Phoenix Suns. The Suns with KD. I mean, the Clippers didn't make any big moves at the NBA trade deadline. Hey, they brought in Bones Highland. But hey, some support for Kawhi. Either way, pretty interesting money line for this one. Both teams is kind of close. -112 for the Clippers and -104 for the Suns heading into this one. That is an 8 o'clock tip-off, Mountain Standard Time, 7 o'clock Pacific. That's going to be a great one, honestly. The Clippers fighting for stability in the playoffs. If you're a Canadian, how can you not love Kawhi Leonard? Either way, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets. So maybe you want some KD point score or point lines. Maybe you want some Kawhi point lines. You can combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Alrighty, moving on to the penalty kill for the Edmonton Oilers, as it was not great for the Oilers against the Detroit Red Wings, and it wasn't great against the Montreal Canadiens either. We will talk about that, but more specifically, 0 for 2 against the Detroit Red Wings last night, and probably the reason why the Oilers lost. But why? Well, before the game, it was reported that Vinny Desharnais was not skating in the warm-up and would be out of the lineup. And at that moment, I sat there and went, this penalty kill is about to take a hit. But we'll see. You're playing Detroit. Maybe you can kind of power through. You got your defenseman that can help you get through it. Not so much. The Edmonton Oilers allowed 2 goals on both penalty killing opportunities for the Oilers. And honestly, both goals, if I'm not mistaken, I know one penalty kill goal or one power play goal for the Red Wings did go off Philip Broberg. Potentially both may have went off Broberg in that one. Not faulting Broberg, because to be honest with you, he was in the right position for both of them. Just bounced off. Bad luck for Broberg. And that's the thing. It was bad luck. But the Edmonton Oilers penalty kill, A, didn't look good, and B, wasn't able to shut down the power play of the Red Wings. Now, Vinny Desharnais, what he does on that penalty kill is so important. And that is where the Edmonton Oilers allowed their goals on the penalty kill. Right in front of the net. Where Vinny Desharnais would have been eliminating the threat in front of Campbell. And those chances just straight up wouldn't happen. Would not happen. Penalty killers last night. Philip Broberg, Ryan McLeod, Brett Kulak, Warren Foegele, Evander Kane. That were out there for a goal. Now, we all know my favorite stat and the goals for and goals against per 60 minutes. The goals against per 60 minutes, shorthanded for those 5 players, I had to rub my eyes and take a second. It was genuinely some of the most obnoxious numbers I have ever seen in my life. I thought this was a basketball score. That's how bad it is. So let's go over the goals against per 60 minutes shorthanded for those 5 Edmonton Oilers penalty killers. Oh, you aren't going to believe this. You will think I'm making this up. Philip Broberg, a 189.21 goals against per 60 minutes shorthanded last night. Ryan McLeod, 189.21. Brett Kulak, 173.11. Warren Foegele, 168.57. And Evander Kane somehow coming out on the lucky end with a 72.18. Whew. That is bad. Now, why do I mention that? Because before the Montreal game, Vinny Desharnais had a goals against per 60 minutes shorthanded for the Edmonton Oilers at a 5.66. And the fantastic, really good number, especially on the penalty kill, especially on the Edmonton Oilers penalty kill. Now, after that Montreal game, and the reason why I rope in that Montreal game is, yes, the Oilers had a bad game in that game. It was kind of a little bit of a sleeper game for the Oilers. It's a matter of having to reply from that Montreal game, and the Edmonton Oilers clearly didn't, especially on the penalty kill. That is why I'm roping that game in as well. And after that Montreal game, Vinny Desharnais' goals against per 60 minutes sat at a 10.14. So I mention that because still, obviously, it's not as bad as those numbers there. But the Edmonton Oilers had one bad game with Vinny Desharnais on the penalty kill. And since then, with that game against Detroit, without him in the lineup, it got even worse. Vinny Desharnais is the most important penalty killer on the Edmonton Oilers, and it was proven last night against the Detroit Red Wings how much his presence is missed on that back end. That is why I think also it is absolutely ridiculous for the Oilers to potentially go with a 20-player lineup without Desharnais against the New York Rangers with Panarin, Zibanejad, Tarasenko, Kreider. You can go on and on. Fox, Keandre Miller. That would be ridiculous. So we'll see. Let's wrap up today's episode with the good, the bad, and the ugly from that game against the Detroit Red Wings. We will talk about that in just a second. Alrighty, let's wrap up with a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly from the game against the Detroit Red Wings last night. The good being the resiliency from the Edmonton Oilers, erasing not one, not two, but 3 2-goal deficits in this one, tying the game in the third period with a beautiful tip from Derek Ryan. And both goals, they are scoring both goals in the second period, or the third period, excuse me. They went into that third period down 2 goals, came back, tied the game, and did not allow the Detroit Red Wings to score another goal in open play. Great shutdown performance by the Oilers in open play in the third period. It was great to see. So that the good from that game, the resilience for the Edmonton Oilers. The bad, we already spent a lot of time talking about it, so I won't elaborate too much, but the bad from the game for the Edmonton Oilers, the penalty kill. 0 for 2 on the PK, and of course doing that without Vinny Desharnais. Tough ask for the Edmonton Oilers for some reason, but it was just bad, cost the Oilers the game, let's be real here. And the ugly for the Edmonton Oilers, that killer instinct. The Edmonton Oilers, after tying the game in the third period, had all the momentum in the world. It was some of the loudest I've ever heard, or not ever heard, but some of the loudest I've heard Rogers play so far this year, other than when Clean Costin stood up from getting injured on New Year's Eve. The Edmonton Oilers had all the ability to win this game in open play. In overtime, they got a power play late in the game, and they weren't able to win it in open play. They weren't able to win it at all. It did go down to a shootout, which is basically a skills competition, but still, the killer instinct from the Edmonton Oilers was awful. Plus, not a bad team, because really, I think the Detroit Red Wings are quite underrated. But the Edmonton Oilers had a team that was, and no disrespect to the Detroit Red Wings, but quote unquote, I guess, lesser than them. They were a team for the taking for the Oilers, and they didn't take the advantage that they should have. And that even goes back to the Montreal Canadiens game. The Edmonton Oilers just have lacked that killer instinct to the point where you're sitting there being frustrated, looking at the standings going, imagine if you just got that extra point against the Detroit Red Wings last night. Imagine if you got those 2 points and tried just that much harder in Montreal. Maybe this would be a different story, but it's not. The Edmonton Oilers still sitting. They're tied for third place in the Pacific Division, but they're still sitting in that wild card spot with some of the technicalities that go around it. So, I mean, the killer instinct, not only from the game, but also to take advantage of spots in the Pacific Division, was very difficult to see for the Oilers. So, the good, the bad, and the ugly from last night against the Detroit Red Wings, the good being the resiliency, erasing not one, not two, but 3 2-goal deficits in the game and scoring both in the third to tie it up. The bad being the penalty kill, 0 for 2 against the Red Wings, carrying over a tough pattern since the Montreal Canadiens game. And the ugly, the killer instinct. They weren't able to put the game away after having all the momentum in the world, scoring both goals in the third period and tying it up. A tough look for the Edmonton Oilers, but they look to come back and bounce back from that loss against the New York Rangers as the Rangers come to town tomorrow night, 7 o'clock puck drop at Rogers Place. That one's going to be a good one. We shall see what the Edmonton Oilers come out with on the ice with a lineup, as maybe we might see a trade, a move, something from the Edmonton Oilers. These next 24 hours are going to be exciting as an Edmonton Oilers fan. Either way, until then, until we got some news, I shall see you tomorrow with a full preview of the game against the Rangers. But until then, party on into the day, and hopefully you can all play La Bamba, baby.